Then we were talking about Mississippi players, Dak Prescott, Dexter McCluster, A.J. Brown, Nick Fitzgerald, and so on, who were, without a doubt, electrifying in the 2000s. So text us 601-885-3776. That's how you enter. Best text goes home with the Tito's Vodka Thirsty Thursday prize pack, which is awesome. We'll kick in some other things, too. All right, we're excited to welcome in our next guest, who we haven't had on, Matthew Freedman with Fantasy Life. And we'll talk fantasy football and sports betting, which are two great topics any time of year. And he joins us on the Farm Bureau Insurance guest line. We are ESPN 105.9 The Zone. Matthew Freedman, good morning. How are you, bud?
I'm great. Thanks for having me. And I got to say, I went to TCU, so I'm a little biased on this. LaDainian Tomlinson, I think he might be a low-key sleeper for best college player that I've ever seen.
I think you're right. I loved him in college. I loved him with the Chargers. Great player and spot on. That was, what was that? Was that Francione? That was before Patterson, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's going back to those old school TCU days. And then Patterson, he ended up having a good run there. And LaDainian Tomlinson, great run as a fantasy asset for all the NFL fans.
That's right. Yeah, man. Gary Patterson, great coach, but Tomlinson, Hall of Famer and great player. So, we got into some fantasy football topics. And here, I got to tell you this, Matthew, just right off the jump. Jason, my executive producer who booked you on the show, and I'm glad that you're with us, pulled a major party foul. And I think we revoked all of his, if he had any, dude qualities. They had their fantasy football draft. I just think this is way too early. They had their fantasy football draft last Sunday night. Isn't that too early, Matthew?
I would say it's never too early to have a good time. But it kind of depends on if you're a sharp or a square. I think if you're sharp, you probably want to have the draft as early as possible because you will have a better sense of what's happening with the depth charts. If you're not all that into like preseason, you kind of like to delay when you research, then you probably want your draft closer to the season. I think there's no wrong way to do it, no right way to do it. It just kind of depends on how it is that you tend to approach it.
Okay. We throw a party. All right, so we do ours late. That may not be the right. So we throw a friend of mine owns a high-end steakhouse. Here in town, and he's not open on Labor Day, and we all get together there and cook food, and we have access to. He's got a beautiful bar, and so I'll be honest, like the best part of the whole thing is the draft party. Matthew, is that okay too?
You know what? I take back everything I said. The way that you do it is right. That sounds amazing. Friends there, you can make fun of each other for terrible draft picks.
Yes.
And, I think it gives me an edge if the other people around me are slightly inebriated. You know what I mean? I don't want them too inebriated because it's not fun, but I want them slightly inebriated so that they're making suboptimal draft picks.
We're visiting with Matthew Freedman, Fantasy Life. He's also fantasy football, sports betting. Now, how would you frame up kind of split your week or yearly? I mean, between fantasy football and sports betting, Matthew?
Yeah, so I got started in fantasy sports. I was obsessed with it, and luckily it turned into a full-time job. And then I transitioned a little bit more into sports betting. The company I was with, Action Network, one of the best, sports betting media companies in the world. So I was there and it's like, hey, if I want to get a little more attention in this company, I need to do more in sports betting. So at this point, I'm more of a sports bettor than a fantasy guy, but fantasy is the first love. I'm still obsessed with it 110%. It's just I do more on the betting side now, creating projections, season-long projections for the teams, but I do it for players as well. And so I think it's they go hand in hand. Like if you're looking at the game thinking about what's going to happen on the spread or the total, it all comes down to the player level as well. So,
right.
It's basically 50-50 for me at this point.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. So we're going to make this segment brought to you by the Golden Moon Casino Sportsbook and Lounge. Since they're our partner, beautiful sportsbook, full bar, food, and not but an hour up the road, and we'll be there, a dozen times at least over football season. And that's perfect for Matthew Freedman with all right. Am I getting this? You're with Fantasy Life. Who else are you with?
I'm with Fantasy Life. That's the one and the only.
Okay.
I've been in a number of places, but Fantasy Life is where I am now.
Okay. So let's jump into a little sports betting, and then we'll have some fun with fantasy. This is a big Saints Cowboys. Okay. Saints are 2.5 hours down the road. We've got season ticket holders. All of us have been to New Orleans a million times. We've been to a bunch of Saints games, so on. Saints win total is at 9.5, Matthew. Now, I think their schedule is super easy. They don't have to take on the big boys at quarterback. It's rare that you get this. You draw this kind of schedule in the NFL. They obviously they acquired Derek Carr. The NFC South's not good. The AFC South, which they drew to, is okay. What direction would you go, Matthew? Saints win total 9.5, over or under?
I have them. This is a wimpy way of saying it, but I have them projected pretty much right at that line. So I wouldn't bet it, but I would say that I do think they are the best team in their division. It's a feisty division that I think is a little bit underappreciated. A lot of people could look at that and say, you know what, the team that won that division last year didn't even have a winning record, right? So, like, people could kind of poo-poo on that division if they want, but I think it will be a little bit tougher than everyone expects. Like, there are some up-and-coming teams there, but I do like the Saints the most out of all four of those teams.
Okay, fair enough. Dennis Allen's got to go to the playoffs with this schedule, or it could get ugly. And again, bringing in Derek Carr, who may not be great, but he's good. Do you agree that he's not elite, he's not great, but he is a good NFL quarterback? You agree or disagree with that statement, Matthew?
Yeah, he is a serviceable NFL quarterback. The thing is, and I will say, you're absolutely right. They need to go to the playoffs with the record they have. If you add up all of the win totals, the market win totals of the teams that they are playing, they do have the easiest schedule in the league.
Wow.
So, they have it set up to where they should be able to run over their schedule. Carr, he's serviceable. I don't know if he's not top 12. He's, I would say, like, at best maybe 14, at worst maybe 22, and all of those guys are kind of in the same tier. I think the transition will be really important. Some guys, like, think of Brady, think of Matthew Stafford. Some guys can transition from one team to another with almost like no friction. And then you think of Russell Wilson last year, where that was just a total train wreck. There's a question as to whether Carr will actually be able to make the move. New offense, new players, new city, new everything. Will he be the same Derek Carr in New Orleans that he was in Oakland and then Las Vegas? I'm a little bit skeptical, but there's a chance.
Okay. Speaking of top 12 QBs, I'm biased. I believe that Dak Prescott is in the top 12. Do you?
Yes, I do. I think he's an underappreciated player. Now, the question is, how much of his recent production has been because he's had Kellen Moore as his offensive coordinator? I think Kellen Moore is a great play caller. I think he's going to have success with the Chargers. And now we're going to have Mike McCarthy, who I think is somewhat antiquated in the way that he approaches offense. I'm worried, and I'm saying this as a Cowboys fan who loves and hates the team, I am worried that Mike McCarthy is going to basically be like the ball and chain that hinders Dak Prescott from doing what he could do otherwise.
He's already had to overcome Jason Garrett and Scott Linehan. I can't do this again. And the fact that they don't even have a general manager, which is incredible in a league that's built the way it is. Okay, Matthew Freedman, check him out, Fantasy Life, fantasylife.com. This guy's resume is incredible. It'd take me 30 minutes to read it, but very accomplished in the world of fantasy football and sports betting, which we love. This is brought to you by the Golden Moon Casino Sportsbook and Lounge, which we love. and we will be there starting August 30th and then throughout football season. Okay, so love your take on Dak. I do think he's underappreciated. And I don't even think he had a wide receiver 2 or 3 last year. I do like the Brandon Cooks pickup. We'll see if Gallup's healthy, Matthew, and can take that step. But I am concerned at tight end and Jake Ferguson. I mean, am I buying that? Should they have gone and maybe grab someone else that's even more athletic? How do you see that, Matthew?
Yeah, it's not like Dalton Schultz before he broke out was someone that anyone had any awareness of at all. He was just a guy.
Right.
And I feel like Ferguson could take that same type of step. Like, he was a pretty decent player at Wisconsin. He's a well-rounded player. I think he's a better receiver than people think. He can line up in line in the slot. He can block all right as a run blocker. So, like, I think he could be a fine player. Let's give him a chance to show what he can do. Dalton Schultz was basically a nobody, and he ended up becoming a pretty good player in that offense. We could see something similar from Jake Ferguson this year.
Okay. All right. Well, let's stay on the Cowboys before we Cowboys win total 10.5. Matthew, over, under? How do you see that?
Man, I'm just going to say I tend to be a skeptic when it comes to the win total market. If I had to bet that, I would probably go under. It's not as if I want to say that, but that is the way that I would do it.
Okay. Yeah, I'm skeptic too. 10.5 is a lot. I think if they go 10 the Eagles are loaded, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And they have a general manager who happens to be a top 3 GM, Roseman, in the league, which is not good for my Cowboys and Dak. Giants may take a slight step back, but Dayball's legit. Commanders, who the hell knows what they're doing? But if they go 10-7, Matthew, I think that's a hell of a year. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I have them projected for 10.3 wins. So that's like right in the wheelhouse of 11-6, 10-7. They're good enough to make the playoffs. And in the NFC, I think they're one of the 3 teams with a real shot of winning that conference and making it to the Super Bowl. So, like, instead of betting, like, if you are bullish on this team, instead of going over 10.5, I would just say bet them to win the division or bet them to win the conference, because if they go over 10.5 wins, then they are legit, and they are right there in the running to make the Super Bowl.
Right.
So if you're optimistic on them, just bet them at larger odds.
Oh, look, man, in this league, if you can go 11-6, good grief. Then you're riding high. We're visiting with Matthew Freedman, Fantasy Life. He joins us on the Farm Bureau Insurance guest line. Okay. When I see NFL guys rank Tua over Dak, I think it's comical. But again, I'm biased. How do you see it, Matthew Freedman?
So it's a good question because I like both of those guys. I have Dak ranked higher because we've seen him do it for longer, much longer. And we've seen him do it in different circumstances. But Tua, I think, also had a really good season that people are kind of dismissing. Like, this was a guy who was fantastic as a high school recruit, did great at Alabama. Before he was injured, it was assumed that he would be the number 1 pick. He ended up going in the top 6. He struggled his first year under highly negative circumstances. But since then, I don't think we've seen anything that would kind of dissuade us from the idea that the promise he showed as a high school recruit and a college player has been unfulfilled or can't be fulfilled in the NFL. Now, he's got the injury concerns with the concussions. And last year, I wouldn't say he was playing in a gimmicky offense, but he was very advantageously positioned by the coaching, the play calling, and the players he had around him. But that's the case for a lot of players in the NFL.
Sure.
And like, if you just look at the games that he played, you don't think about the games that he missed, but look at the games that he actually played, he was one of the most efficient quarterbacks in the league. He was actually right up there on a per attempt basis with Patrick Mahomes. Now, I don't think he's as good as Patrick Mahomes, but this is all a way of saying that within the right offense and surrounded by the right players, he can be as productive as almost any other quarterback in the league. And kind of bringing this back to Dak, I wish Dak had that kind of support.
Me too.
You know, like if Dak were in that position, we would be thinking of this guy as like one of the top 2, top 3 quarterbacks in the league. So I like Tua. I like the situation that he's in even more.
I could not agree more. I would love to see Dak with Sean Payton or Kyle Shanahan or Mike McDaniel, guys that are innovative and fantastic play callers. I agree with you there. We're visiting with Matthew Freedman. He joins us on the Out of Bounds show, Fantasy Life. Matthew Freedman on ESPN 105.9 The Zone. And this segment is powered by the Golden Moon Casino Sportsbook and Lounge, full bar, food, 40 TVs, beautiful place to watch the games and have some fun. Okay, Matthew, what is your favorite over-under NFL win total this year?
Well, I mean, we talked about Derek Carr, and I'm looking at the team that he left in the Raiders going under their win total of 6.5. I think this team is an absolute disaster. If you look at the move from Derek Carr to Jimmy Garoppolo, like maybe Garoppolo is as good as Derek Carr, but maybe he isn't. What is, I'd say, fairly certain is that he is much likelier to miss more games than Derek Carr did. Like Garoppolo has just had a problem staying healthy. And then the backup quarterback situation there is much worse than it was last year. Jarrett Stidham in his final 2 games, he actually looked like a pretty competent backup. Now they have Brian Hoyer as the backup, who is kind of like more of a quarterback's coach at this point than an actual quarterback. And so you could see how stuff spirals out of control very quickly. You have Josh Jacobs, who was the engine of that offense last year, not reporting for camp. I imagine he comes back at some point, but is he going to be in football shape? Is he going to be willing to play through some of those nagging injuries? Devontae Adams is already openly saying that he's not really pleased with how stuff has transpired this offseason. Like, this is set up for things to go very south very quickly. So under 6.5, the win total for the Raiders, that's one of my favorite under bets this year.
How much do you bet on a weekend? You don't have to tell me money, but how many transactions, Matthew?
Sure. On a weekend, so I have kind of 2 portions of the bankroll. One is reserved for sides and totals. And so I would say on a typical NFL Sunday or typical NFL week, maybe I'm betting 5 to 8 games, normally on the spread. I just know that I'm a better on the spread than on the total. And then a pretty decent number of transactions for player props, because that really is where I got my start. And I'm more confident in that market, and those markets are generally a little bit softer. At the same time, you can't get as much money down on player props. And I kind of think of player props as more like fun and recreational than anything else. I kind of view props as like a version of fantasy sports, like instead of, I'm in leagues with my buddies, but I also think of like, hey, I don't really like this player all that much this week. I'm going to bet against him in the player prop market.
Okay.
It's like, it's a version of fantasy for me. Whereas when I'm betting sides and totals, that's more, I kind of quote unquote investing.
I like that. Matthew Freedman, Fantasy Life on the Out of Bounds show. Okay. How much have you won? What's the most you've won on a weekend, NFL weekend?
I'm not gonna give a money amount, but what I will say is the best day I've ever had was the Rams Patriots Super Bowl a few years ago, where I thought that game was overinflated, and so I had unders across the board. Basically, every way you could bet unders in that game, I was doing it. I was basically betting on nothing to happen in that game. And that's pretty much what ended up happening, a whole lot of nothing. I think it was a 13-3 game, so, and a lot of people thought that was a pretty boring Super Bowl. That was one of the most excited moments of my life, seeing absolutely nothing happen on that field. People were wondering why I was so excited, but that was a game that really supercharged my bankroll. And that's the most success I've ever had.
I love it. FantasyLife.com. Matthew Freedman joining us on the Out of Bounds show. We're brought to you by the Golden Moon Casino Sportsbook and Lounge. And now I thought I was ready for football. I'm really ready. Okay. Well, I've only got a couple of minutes. Matthew is a 5-time top 20 finisher in the Fantasy Pros accuracy contest. So, Matthew, if you got the first pick, and maybe you've already had it, but if you have the first pick in a fantasy draft, who are you going with?
I would say it's Justin Jefferson. And, some of this would depend on if it's PPR, half PPR, whatever the format is. But in general, Justin Jefferson, he's the best receiver. I mean, honestly, if this generation is ever to have something that approaches Jerry Rice, which just feels like blasphemous to say, but if we are ever to see something like that, it's Justin Jefferson. He can play inside, he can play outside. He can win at all three levels of the field. I think almost regardless of who's throwing him the ball, he can be a producer. He, was great in college. He's still young. He's ascending. I mean, Jefferson is the guy. There are a lot of decent options there. Maybe if you wanted to go with Jamar Chase, that's fine. If you wanted running back, I don't think there's anything wrong with Christian McCaffrey, but I think Justin Jefferson is a high floor, high ceiling guy who's not going to lose you your league.
Matthew, we've got to do this again. I really enjoyed it. So
absolutely.
And I didn't get to half of what I wanted to cover, but it was just fun to kind of lay it out with the Saints and the Cowboys because of our market gravitates to Dak, and then New Orleans because of proximity. We've got to do this again. FantasyLife.com. FantasyLife.com. Matthew Freedman. Matthew, thanks so much, buddy. Have a good weekend.
Thanks. You too.
Hi, dude. Man, that was great. That was a lot of fun. Cool. We got the Key City Brewery guys coming in studio at 9:30. Straight out of Vicksburg, Mississippi, baby. Rivertown. Delicious craft beer. Key City Brewery team coming in at 9:30 live in studio.